Hi class, thanks for joining. I wanted to go over some of the problems, or I should say actually one of the problems that was in the video that I asked you guys to watch for homework. I wanted to refresh on the two different ways we went about solving our proportion, as well as just added in a third or additional way of looking at how we could approach this problem. There isn't any particular best way. It's whichever way you feel is the best way for you, as well as depending on the problem, you may feel there is one way that is better used or applicable for that specific problem. So it's good to have a versatile skill set of approaching any given problem, right? And that's what we're about. So here we're talking again about solving our proportions. And in this problem, we're going to use relationships, right? What is the relationship taking place with the information that is given, right? Take the information that is given to us, and we know we have an unknown value in our denominator, and in our numerators, we have two values that we are saying is proportional. And so that 10 is related to 30. And we want to know, what is that relationship? How are they related? Because if we can identify their relationship and how they're related, then we would be able to identify the same relationship for our denominator and be able to then go ahead and solve for our unknown value. So if we were to say, how do we go from 10 to 30, or how do we go from 30 to 10? Again, we're talking about multiplication or division. We can either take our 30 and divide our 30, right? We can divide our 30 by 10 to see what the value is or what the relationship is, or we could multiply 10 by a number if we know our multiplication facts to see what we would get, how we would get to 30. Okay, and I'm sure at this point we all know that if we multiply 10 by 3, we would get 30, and or if we divided our 30 by 10, we would get a value of 3. So we now know that the relationship between the information that is given is a relationship of, or a value, I should say, of 3, right? We know we have a value of 3 taking place. So now I can say the relationship between this value of 2 and our unknown value is connected by a value of 3. So since I multiplied 10 times 3 to give me 30, right, I'm going to multiply 2 times 3 to give me my missing value. And we all know that 2 times 3 is equal to 6. And so we are able to find our missing value that way, right? Okay. Again, we use either multiplication or division to identify the relationship between the given information to figure out our unknown information. Okay, now we're going to use, as we learned in the video as well, cross multiplication to solve our proportion. And so with cross multiplication, because we know that our ratios are proportional, we're allowed to cross multiply. And so we would take our 2 and multiply it by 30, and take our 10 and multiply it by x. When we cross multiply, we would get an expression of 10x is equal to 60. And then we would solve for x by isolating that x. We know that x is connected to its coefficient of 10 by multiplication, and so we would use the inverse operation, divide by 10, to free or isolate our variable of x, get it by itself so we could identify its value. Whatever we do to one side, we know we were going to do to the other side. So we divide our 60 by 10, and that leaves us with a value of 6. And as we can see, we have the same answers, right? We come up with the same solution. And then a third way, again, is simply just to keep us aware of the relationships and what we're doing, is using the inverse operation. And that is simply saying that we know when we're talking about ratios, we are talking about fractions. And when we're talking about fractions and or ratios, we are talking about the operation of division. This bar, this line represents division. And so the inverse operation of division would be multiplication. And why are we going to use multiplication? Because we see that we have our variable in the denominator and we want to isolate that variable, right? And we want to get it out of the denominator. And so in order to do that, we can multiply this ratio, this expression, by x, which is like saying x over 1. And that would cancel out our x's on this side. Whatever we do to one side, we know we have to do to the other. And so we multiply 10 by x and we get 10x halves, right? We get 10x halves is equal to 30 times 2, which is 60. Okay, and now we follow the same order of operations. We want to isolate our variable, so we're going to divide that variable by 10 because it is connected by a coefficient by way of multiplication. We divide this side by 10, we must divide the other side by 10, and we're left with x is equal to 6. Now again, you might say the cross multiplication is kind of almost the same thing and might even be a little bit faster. But again, based on the problem that you come across, it is very good for you to be able to just be aware and see how we could approach these problems from different angles or different perspectives. All right. I will see you guys in class. You can ask me any questions if you have any. Thanks and see you soon.